So by not sharing ourselves and telling our stories, we're hiding ourselves because we fear that if we show up authentically, like we won't fit into society or somebody else's like values.
They're speakers, authors, and real-life rock stars, bringing you life-changing thoughts that rock, taking conversation all the way to 11.
Most shows only go to 10.
Well, it's one louder, isn't it? These go to 11.
This is Thoughts That Rock. Now, here are your hosts, Jim Knight and Brant Menswar.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Welcome, everybody, to Thoughts That Rock.
Slow motion running, Jim, for
Slow motion
all of the people
edition.
listening to the podcast. That really is effective.
There are about 8 or 9 people that watch us visually as well.
Yeah.
Come on, man. That's really for them more than anything else.
Fine.
That's true. Everybody else is like, what is happening right now?
Fine.
Welcome, everybody. You know the deal. It is, we think, your favorite podcast. That's what we tell ourselves anyway. And, you know, if you're a first-time listener, this is a 30 to 40-minute podcast, and we're just trying to solve problems. That's all we really do around here, trying to help a brother and a sister out, right?
That's it. We are super excited. We have just such a fun guest today. You know, normally when we have guests, we get them.
They're not that fun.
Well, when we get them from everywhere, right? But rarely do they reach out on their own with a compelling email in the proper format that actually addresses how we run our show and is in the idea and style of which we do things, and they give us what their actual thoughts would be like.
Yeah, if you're going to invite yourself to the party, you should listen to the party first, right? You should know what you're doing.
She did everything right to the point that we were like, please come on the show.
Yeah.
And we now use her example for anyone who really wants to be on the show. So if you want to be on the show, or you are a representative of someone, don't just send us some BS PR bullshit. We don't want that. We want you to send us something in the format of which we do so that it makes sense and we read it. Otherwise, you know what we do? Delete.
This happens a couple times a year. You get on a rant during one of the guest intros, but that's fine.
Molly Sider. She is a ICF accredited life coach.
Yeah.
Amazing. She has an incredibly popular podcast called I Am This Age.
Love it.
And she's a storyteller and teaches people how to tell their stories, right? Helps people to make a big change no matter how old they are or think they are. And she was fantastic today, and we talked about so many things. She happens to also have spent a former life as a wine professional, sort of in every aspect of the wine business, but worked at probably one of the greatest wine shops in New York City, known to man, and had these amazing. We're probably going to have her back on.
Yeah, we have to now.
Drink wine for people who don't like wine.
And you're going to hear in the episode, we were pretty transparent. Truth be told, we had a whole, 15, 20-minute conversation about her former life, which has nothing to do with what she's doing right now. But it was a lot of fun. She gave some meaty stuff, and there were some really good stories, which, since we're talking about, you know, how to tell your story, that's the topic. And she's an expert at it, and it fit in perfectly with a lot of the things that we're doing in our day-to-day as well. So we think you're going to love this episode. There she is.
Dun, dun, dun.
Hi.
Molly Sider. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're good. Look at us acting like she's just not showing up when really we just had a whole full-on 20-minute conversation before we pushed record, and it has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today.
We don't often talk to people who've spent a lifetime sort of in the wine business before what they do now.
Yes.
And with a name that sounds like something I'd order at the local pub. Give me one of those Molly Ciders, please. You know, how do you not?
That's fitting.
How do you not have that conversation?
Yeah.
Right?
I told Brant what we were going to be doing. I said, this is the topic, and this is great. And he went with the one thing we're not even going to be talking about today.
No,
but now we have another episode that
right.
we're going to have to do with Molly.
I can't wait. I cannot wait.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
So today, though, let's tell people, we said in the intro, obviously, that you were a longtime wine professional and aficionado, but obviously we're going to lean into your background as a professional life coach, specifically with some of the things that you're doing with regards to helping people tell their story and really understand their true identity so they can live a life of purpose, which is really a lot of what your work is about as well. So we're just so thrilled that you're spending a little bit of time with us. And so hopefully people have already checked out the graphic and know that we're going to be talking about how, in fact, do you tell your story. So honestly, we're just going to leave the floor open to you, Molly. What is your first thought that rocks when it comes to how do you tell your story?
Yeah, well, thank you for that wonderful intro. First of all, I'm so happy to be here. My first thought on how to tell your story is, what do I mean by sharing your story, and why don't we share our stories enough? And what I mean is, first of all, we all have stories, right? That's kind of all we do. We share our stories over the dinner table, on the phone. We were just sharing stories before this podcast started. But we also tell ourselves stories, and those are the stories that I'm really talking about. So we tend not to talk about the things that, like, we think that if the world knew about would make us look bad, right? So we have these internal stories that we've already created meaning around, and we're often afraid to share those with the world because we're afraid that if we do, that the world will then reflect back at us what we have already decided is true about ourselves and that story. And that's usually something that's bad, right? That's usually something like, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not, attractive enough, we're not lovable, something like that. And so we hide, and we hide these like huge chunks of ourselves from the world. And when we hide, we are not showing up to the world authentically. We can't possibly be. And we spend so much energy hiding who we really are, which means that, like, we're not able to be fully engrossed in the things that we really care about and the things that we really value. And we also oftentimes don't even know, like, what we value, like what we value versus what we've been told to value. We mix up our values with other people's values. So by not sharing ourselves and telling our stories, we're hiding ourselves because we fear that if we show up authentically, like, we won't fit into society or somebody else's like values box. We think that if we share our stories, if we share who we really are with all of those mistakes and all the like maybe unconventional values, that we won't be loved and we won't belong. So also we have a biased view of our stories, right? So if we're unwilling to share our narratives with another person, we only see our side of the story. And then as human beings, we're wired to look for proof, like out in the world, that prove our stories that we're telling us to be true. Right.
Yeah. Perfect layup, right? I know you're going to want to.
I mean, you're right in my wheelhouse. Yes. So, we've had over 10,000 people, more than 10,000. I will get corrected by our Keisha, our content police. We've had more than 10,000 people take the Black Sheep Values Assessment, which helps people discover what their 5 non-negotiable values are. And, what we know after, almost 3 years of people doing this is we sort of have the 5 most shared values among all humans. And part of what you're talking about fits right in to what the data tells us, right? So the 5 most shared values are connection, integrity, authenticity, personal growth, and creativity. And when we're talking about telling stories and trying to be authentic, that doesn't happen without the integrity piece, right? So the integrity piece is really about creating a safe space so that you can show up authentically and not worry or have a fear of judgment or, being looked down upon or made fun of or any of those sorts of things that happen. But there is so few places of integrity where you feel comfortable enough that we simply won't share those stories, or the stories we share will not be authentic, right? And in that way. And so how do you encourage someone to share their story in a place that the integrity is either suspect or they don't know enough about the space to know whether it's safe or not?
Oh, that's such a good point and such a good question. And relevant to my thought number 3, which is how to share your story or how to start. But, I think the really important thing is, yes, like find a space that is safe, and find somebody who, is willing to listen and who can really listen like properly and not just like throw, advice at you, like thoughtless advice at you or whatever. But I would say, listening is as important as sharing. And so asking lots of questions and getting super curious. Because then you can decide, once you like understand the person and the space better, then you get to choose, is this somebody who, or is this a space where I feel safe to do this? And if not, don't.
Yeah.
You get to pick.
Yeah. So, I think this ties back to the fundamental challenge of discovering what your non-negotiable values are, right? What are those personal core values that you make you who you are? When you don't know what those are, you don't know what to look for in a safe space.
Right.
Right. So when you know what your values are, you can look for people who share those values. You can look for evidence that those values are present in a particular place, and it lets you know whether or not this has the potential to be a safe space or not. Right. And I think that is one of the big challenges is that it starts with the what, not with the why. You have to start with what are your non-negotiable values, because that's where the why is born from. And so when we're talking about somebody sharing their story and showing up authentically, how can you be authentic when you have no idea what makes you authentic, right? And that's what we have discovered is that it's pretty much what we have figured, at least on our research, is that it's less than 1% of the people can tell you definitively what their 5 non-negotiable values are. They can give you an idea of what they think is really important, but those are not non-negotiable values. Those are things that are important. And we treat those things like they're, very, very close to each other, but in fact, they are miles apart from each other. And so it's part of the challenge, I think, when you get into these sort of values work, which is the very foundation for which things like sharing your story really happens. If you want it to resonate, it's resonating because there are points of connection between values among people. And so, why do we see extremism, no matter if it's political or it's sports or it's fandom or whatever that might be? The reason that you see extremism sort of flourish is because the one thing they do really well is connect values. And if the value that you possess is really evident in someone else, even if it's not necessarily good for society, it makes it easy to connect because you recognize it because it's in you. And that's part of the challenge, I think, that happens with that sort of thing.
I was going to say, before Molly jumps in, I think the reason that you guys probably are in lockstep, you resonate with some of the same language. Molly, you're saying, why is it that we don't share our story enough? And you're doing the same thing. I think the experience that you've had is, why aren't people either exuding or even able to verbally say, here's my values? Because they don't do that work. Thankfully, you've got the assessment. You do work, Molly, between the two of you, the more that you can get people to get into that headspace and they can put these into real life, or at least for some people who think they know what their personal values are, but in fact, they're really something else because of how they live their life. Yep. I think there's an epiphany for them. And, and again, both of you are probably doing this type of work. And that, I guess my question would be, I know we were already dabbling a little bit in your third one, before we jumped the gun. Why don't we see, people telling their story enough? And I was a little bit surprised because I would think, I guess when I think pre 4 or 5 years ago, right now, people are easily able to do this because they can jump on social media. I think people become very bold, sometimes brazen. Maybe it is extreme, like you said, but I think people don't have as much of a problem saying, here's who I am, here's my authentic self, here's my story, here's my values, whether it's true or not, but they had no problem saying it. I don't know if people were really doing that half a decade ago. And maybe it's too much because the safe space, and again, this will get to your third point here later on, is, where do you do that maybe other than social? So I'm saying a lot here, but maybe just to expand, and especially Brant, what you were just talking about, why don't we share our story enough? Like, why don't people do this? Do they feel they're going to be attacked or canceled, or it's going to be wrong and you're going to be judged? Why do you think that is, Molly?
Yes, to all of those things. I mean,
all of it.
Yeah, I think so much of it is fear. And like I said before, like it's fear of not belonging. It's fear of not, being loved. It's fear that like I think the things, when we're not, when we are not being nice to other people or groups of people, or judging groups of people, or, whatever, like what is the reason? It's because we're fearful of something. It's always like everything comes down, I think, to fear. And so like I can't help but think like anything that anybody ever says, like if they're being mean or they're yelling something or whatever, it's like, okay, what are you actually afraid of? What's the root cause of like this anger right now? And so like if you're feeling that way about other groups of people, like surely you're worried also that other people are going to feel that way about you. I think fear is it's such a driver, and I think that's part of the reason why like it's easier to find connection with people with shared values, even if they're not ideal or helpful or kind values.
Which is one of the solutions to your question. Your thought could be you need to find other people that have some shared values. Could be one way, right?
Right. But another way is, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, but like it's so important to also listen to other people. Like sharing your story is so important, and listening to other people share theirs is as important, maybe even more important. Because if you sit down next to somebody at a bar, say, who you would never normally talk to, you probably, maybe has completely different values than you, has a completely different upbringing, maybe a different religion, maybe a different color skin, like something. But you sit and, you might have all sort of like preconceived notions and judgments about that person. But if you sit down next to that person at the bar and you just start asking them questions and you start hearing their story, all of a sudden they become a human. They become 100% human. Because we can't, Brené Brown talks about this a lot, but like, we're not just like naturally wired to like cause harm on other people.
Right.
We have to, in order to do that, you have to be able to see other people or groups of people as, somewhat less than 100% human. But the antidote to that is talking to them and listening to them and hearing their life stories, because it's so hard to not think of another person as 100% human when you're sitting next to them at a bar and you're hearing like, some struggle that they went through yesterday, or they lost their, spouse or whatever. Like all of a sudden everything changes. Right.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally. It makes sense. It makes me want to hear now. What is your second thought that rocks around how to tell your story?
Yes. So my second thought that rocks is that changing our internal narratives changes our external experiences, and then allows us to write our next chapters. So what does that mean?
I don't know. I'm trying to write it all down. Say it again. That was fancy.
Okay.
Say it one more time.
Changing our internal narratives changes our external experiences.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So
I know you're going to say something. We have a friend who also is a ICF accredited coach.
Oh, great.
And so there's a phrase that he would use, and he used it so much I wanted to punch him straight in the face, just so you know. But it was this, he'd start off with this: I tell myself a story, or I see you and I tell myself this story, and he would say it over and over. I know it's something that he had just had learned. He had was fresh out of the, whatever, the academy. And he kept telling this and saying it over. And I'm like, I tell myself a story that I'm going to punch you straight in the face if you keep saying, I tell myself this story. But I assume that what he was saying is rooted in what you're about to explain.
So
I promise I'm not punching you.
I'm not.
I wanted to.
I'm not totally
if you would have
sure
heard how many times he said it, you would have been like, enough with the I tell myself a story.
Yeah.
This is the CPC handshake that they all know.
That's
this.
Right.
Yes.
Well, right. So, but this is what I was saying in the beginning. Like, we all tell ourselves stories, right? And oftentimes they're one-sided. It's just our point of view. And as we have all heard, like, there's three sides to every story, probably more. But when you share your story with somebody, like you just said before, you're creating a connection with another person, right? So vulnerability invites vulnerability, and it creates connection. And so often, so there are a few things about this, but so often we believe that we are alone in our feelings, that no one else has ever felt this icky thing that we're feeling. And that is a really heavy load to carry alone. And I think you were also saying something about this earlier, but I always like to say that we're unique in our details of our story, and we're not so unique in our thoughts and feelings and emotions. So most likely, whatever you're feeling, the other person you're telling to is feeling the same way, or has felt that way in some point, or knows somebody else who has, right? And when you know that you're not alone, you're not the only one who has ever had this experience or felt this way, you share the load with those other people. And obviously, when you're sharing a heavy load, what happens? It gets lighter and it gets easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The other part to this is you're able to detach your identity from the meaning of that experience. I talk about identity a lot in my podcast and out in the world and with clients. But it becomes more of an I did versus an I am. And also the idea that we attach our identity to the things that we do, the titles that we have, our successes, our failures, our relationship statuses, and that's not what our identity is really. What else? You might be able to, you might receive something, this is a coachy thing, but you might receive some sort of acknowledgement and validation, which might sound something the other person might sound something wow, that sounds like you were really in a bind. Anyone would have responded that way, or, oh my God, I probably would have done the same thing, or I've done that before, which is a really useful way to sort of regroup your feelings, create acceptance for what was happening, and also to help to reframe what happened and what our role was in that situation and experience.
We have a friend, Vin Jiang, as one of our speaker buddies, who is amazing. He's an incredible magician, but actually a communications expert.
Yeah.
And he teaches these classes. And one of the things I saw the other day in one of his new posts, he's talking about creating these points of connection. And I think this really ties in well with what you're talking about, of both how do you, sort of what you're going to get into next, I think, is how you tell your story. But the fact that you are telling your story, but you're also listening, he would say that whenever somebody asks you a question, how you answer that question is really not about giving them an answer. It's about giving them points of potential connection. Mm-hmm. So if somebody said, where'd you grow up? And I just said, Manchester, New Hampshire. I mean, it's all or nothing. They either, there's something there or whatever. But if I said, oh, you know what? Grew up in this sort of small, cold little town where all of our liquor stores are off the highway. It's in Manchester, New Hampshire, where we're all wicked smart. Right. And so if I answered the question in that way, I just gave so many points of potential connection. It could be cold. It could be small. It could be liquor stores off the highway. It could be wicked smart. What's the accent up in Boston? It's all of the things that are these potential points that give people more opportunity to connect with you. And I think that is such a brilliant way of when we talk about telling our stories if we thought about it in ways of giving people opportunities to connect and not just telling whatever it is that we want to tell.
Well, it's like Ty Bennett says, it's more important to be interested than interesting.
Yeah, totally.
And, you know, one of the things, Molly, you know, when I was at Hard Rock, I ran training for them for a couple decades, but we actually got trained in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is still very popular out there. But, you know, I went out and was trained with several of the senior executives there and had a chance to meet Stephen Covey quite a bit. And, you know, you started talking a little bit about listening more to others in your previous thought, but it goes into this too. And part of the training that we did is there are some techniques, some transitional phrases that you can use, but the ultimate core, which is really, Brant, what you're talking about, like if you just let it slide and you're just sort of halfway hearing because you're getting ready to respond the way that you want to respond versus totally listening to the extent that I understand you, not just in a conversation, the connection could be, man, that's got to be tough. Yeah. I totally get what you're saying. Yeah. I truly understand. What did you do about that? It's going to take a little bit more time, a little bit more patience, but you get to nirvana a whole lot quicker than point, counterpoint. You're making a point, I'm making a point. One of us is going to win the conversation. So I, you know, when you say changing your internal narratives, could be if I'm trying to get to the point of I really do want to connect, like you say, I really do just have to shut my yapper for a little bit, listen a little bit more, and maybe, just maybe, I might see your perspective. I might have my opinion changed. I might see a different way of viewing it, which is what we all hope for, right, Molly?
Yes, totally. And I think you were just referring to, I was listening to one of your episodes from a few weeks ago with, I can't remember who it was, but who was talking about how to ask better questions. That's who you're referring to. Yeah. Yeah. It was such a good episode. Everybody should go listen to that episode again.
Yes.
But yeah, I think, you know, listening and staying curious and asking curious questions and, you know, I mean, this is hard, but not, you know, trying not to make assumptions and judgments and stuff like that. And obviously we're human, so we're going to do those things, and that's also okay.
Yeah.
But really, yeah, just like listening and staying curious and, yeah, it's the best way to connect. I'm
no doubt.
I'm forgetting, but do you know who Adam Grant is? You probably know who Adam Grant is.
Adam Grant? Yeah.
Sure. Yep.
And he has, he wrote a book like a year or so that came out, that's called Think Again or Rethinking. And he talks about that, like different way, like how we're different. Everyone's like either like a politician or a preacher or a salesman, or I'm like going to get this all wrong, or a scientist. Yeah. Basically the point is that we want to think like a scientist. You know, like that's like the ideal sort of way to be. And so that's basically just being like staying really curious and wanting to be like being open to being proved wrong, because if we're always just like trying to prove ourselves right, we're not growing. We're not learning. So like the ideal thing is actually to have our minds changed, because that means we're actually like growing as human beings.
We just had this conversation yesterday when we were with our friend Alan Stein Jr. and I was talking about that awesome scene, if you're a fan at all, of Ted Lasso.
Oh, yeah.
Where he's playing darts and he's got the antagonist and he's just hitting the darts wherever he wants. And the last one is the bullseye shot, but he's like, and he was making a point. There were a lot of things he said, but he said, if you were to just have been curious, you would know a little bit more about me, about my background, what makes me tick. And he was making a leadership point that this is how we should live as humans. If you're just a little bit more curious, what a difference it would really make. It's just one of the great scenes in there. And I know a lot of people are using Ted Lasso clips these days, but it really goes to the essence of your thought here.
Yeah, I mean, I love Ted Lasso for that reason. I mean, it's so good. And like, as you know, studying all this stuff and being life coaches, like it's so obvious what's happening, like what they're doing and what they're, you know, like the points that they're trying to get across, and they do it so well. And like for the masses, it's just such a smart show. But I love that example. It's so good.
All right, Molly, bring us home. What is your third? You kind of already gave it away earlier on. What is the third thought that rocks when it comes to, you know, telling your story?
Okay, so the third thought that rocks is how do we tell our story. Like telling your story is hard and can be scary, as we've already said. And so like, where do you even start? So we've already talked about this.
Social media.
Yeah, social media. Yeah, maybe. You can start on social media. You can start on a stage. Like that's honestly one of the places that I started was telling my story on stages like Moth style. But I'm not like telling everyone to go out and do that unless that sounds like fun to you, in which case, by all means, go for it. It's so fun. But you know, sort of like what we've been getting at, you know, telling your story. When I say tell your story is kind of just a fancy way of saying talk about yourself and your experiences, right? Find somebody, as you were saying, find someone you trust who is capable of really listening. So maybe that's a friend, maybe that's a partner, a coach, a therapist, ideally, if it's not a coach or a therapist. It's really important to ask for what you need. So maybe that's something like, I'm not looking for advice. I really just need you to listen. Can you do that? Maybe it's something like, would you be willing to listen? And, you know, can you reflect back what you're hearing from me so that you can, you know, rethink some of it? You can hear another perspective. Tell someone your story and listen to them tell you theirs. You know, go start listening to other people's, or go out into the world, go to a storytelling event, listen to a podcast. I mean, this is, you know, what we do, but just listen. Again, we kind of already went over that, but of course, listening is, it's motivating. It's like, even if you're just listening over a podcast, like you're still creating some sort of connection. You know, you're still like, all of a sudden you're like, okay, I felt that way. I don't feel so alone. That person is sharing their story in a podcast. Okay, great. What else? Get curious, like all the things we were just like, get really curious about other people's experiences, ask lots of questions. And if you're still having trouble after all of that, like if you still are just like, I don't know where to begin, I'm feeling stuck, I feel icky, start by writing it down, start by journaling. And if you don't know what to journal, Google some journal prompts. There's a gazillion out there. So all of those are really, really helpful. And of course, I think we'll agree that, you know, getting a coach or a therapist is really helpful.
Well, I act really as Brant's therapist now already, but I know you have this example. I don't know if you're already thinking this, but when you're talking about proof of your value, so I'm going back a little bit, which is one great way. Talk about the person that you spoke after, and it was all about taking the picture. You use that now in your session. I think that's a great way to tell your story. You might have to set it up.
Yeah. So several years ago, I was speaking at a conference, and the person speaking in front of me was a ethnographer and a product development specialist. And she wrote a book called Everything We Touch. She also is an amazing photographer. And this book, she followed around 62 different people, all different ages, races, sexual orientation, you name it, a really good cross-section of the world. And basically documented everything they touched for 24 hours. And at the end of the day, she would take all of those items and put them together in one photograph. And so, you know, they woke up and they put on their slippers, they brushed their teeth, they did some yoga, they took the dog for a walk. You start to see all of these items chronologically in this photograph. And it really starts to give you an idea of what really matters to someone when you see what they choose to touch over the course of 24 hours. Wow. And it led me to really on the path that I've been for years now, which is even when I thought I had figured it out and I said, here are the values that mattered to me. My next question was,
where's the proof?
Yeah. What if somebody followed me around for 24 hours? Would they see any proof of the things that I'm saying are my non-negotiables? Yeah. And the truth was maybe, but not deliberately. Mm-hmm. And that was a problem for me because it made me realize that I was winging it and I wasn't living my life with deliberate intention. And so that's what the big shift happened was, okay, it's not just about discovering what these values are, proving they're real. It's about intentionally speaking these values into existence every day, towards and through my values to have the type of impact that I was going for. And so when I started to do that, my whole life changed, everything changed. And I started to see some of those things that I wanted manifested for myself. As a guy who doesn't believe in manifestation, it made me understand what I would call practical manifestation. I'm not claiming some bullshit, Lamborghini in my driveway. I am using the things that matter most to me to, manifest some sort of impact that I can control only what comes out of my mouth, not how they're going to accept it, not how the outcome is going to,
I love
appear.
that idea so much, and I totally agree. Brené Brown again, she's top of mind today, I guess. She talks about aspirational values versus lived values, and I think that's that's basically what you're illustrating there. Is we can have values, but are we actually living them day to day? And that's okay that we're not. Just like staying aware of it.
Yes.
But I think if you were taking all the things that you said, Molly, if you said, I'm reading books, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm journaling, I'm going to start deliberately listening more. If like you took, I think you listed like 10 things. Yeah. If you did all those, and those are, most of those are little to no cost. It's a little bit more time, a little bit more focus. Mm-hmm. Now it would be a little bit of some rigor, a little bit of effort to take a photograph of everything that you touch. But I bet you as an outside third-party layman, could pick up anybody's photograph and go, I understand this person. I know kind of, maybe not 100%, but that is like you talk about physical manifestation of who this person is. I at least have a better shot at it. Mm-hmm. So if you can't actually do that, I don't know what the equivalent would be other than you were already making the comments about deliberate intention. How could I maybe not physically go and collect all these items, but how could I just be a little bit more deliberate about what I say is important and valuable to me? And it actually is. And that in its sense, you're telling your story. You're putting it out there for the world to see if that's what you want. Right.
Yeah. I love that idea so much of the photos and stuff. But yeah,
Paula Zuccotti is her name, by the way.
What is
Paula
her name?
What?
Paula Zuccotti.
Paula
is
Zuccotti.
Her. Yeah, she is. I think she lives in Spain, as far as she did at the time anyways. But she's brilliant. And that book is amazing.
Yeah.
Like you could pick it up on Amazon still, but it's an amazing book to see. She did everything from like a nun, where the most interesting one to me, there was two. One was a 2-year-old, and they had touched the most items. There was like 100 things they touched, because that's all they do is go around and touch everything. Right. But then there was a nun, and the only thing she touched in 24 hours was her smock, her rosary, the Bible.
Yeah, that sounds a lot.
Like it was maybe 5 things and nothing else. Right. Wow. And it just makes you go, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It puts it into perspective.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And like, to your point, Jim, I think like, if you're not going to go out and just take pictures, or you're not going to journal or whatever, like maybe, as you're talking, I'm thinking like, well, maybe you could just, when you go for a walk, like pay attention to the things that like strike you and what you notice. Like, cause if you and I go out for a walk together, we're going to notice different things, and we're going to pay attention to different things. So that could be like a really easy sort of practical way to also get started on this, I guess.
Agreed.
Right.
Paula Zuccotti, that's a long. I like Molly cider. Like if I was in a bar, like you said, I'll have a Molly cider and
Molly,
Paula.
And a Paula Zuccotti.
You don't already have that trademark. You should have your own cider.
You should. Right. Exactly.
I have a friend who makes cider up in upstate New York, so maybe I'll make him.
There you go.
Use your wine background. You throw in a little bit of this and that, and you make a Molly cider.
Yeah.
Come on, like that. It sounds delicious.
I'm gonna get one right after this episode.
Right. Me too.
Molly, where can people get a little bit more access to you, or maybe just some of the learnings, anything that you're working on right now? Where can we send people? I mean, I really want them to check out your podcast. It was I Am This Age.
That's right.
Is the name of the podcast. But where can we send people?
Yeah. So check out the podcast for sure, because I'm, I help people like kind of pull out their stories there, but it's also stories of change and people who are making change at an age over 40. But you can also see me. You can also get in touch with me through my website, which is just mollycider.com. And by the way, that's spelled with an S, not a C.
Yes.
And you can also, if you want, like, just to interact with me a little bit more on all of this stuff, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm Molly at This Age. like I Am This Age, but Molly at This Age. Yeah, those are the best places.
All right. That's great.
Yeah.
We're so thankful. I mean, it's funny because, sometimes we will get referrals, and we know a lot of people either in music, education, hospitality, and now speaker authors tend to be a lot of people that come on the show. But again, for you to have listened to a show and then sort of put yourself out there, it just...
She told her story, Jim.
She did, and it resonated with you. You were like, this is the best email ever. It was so
please.
fun. It was too cool.
I'm so glad.
We're just so thankful that you just spent a little bit of time with us. And we're going to keep an eye on your journey. And honestly, we need to have Molly back on to just talk about wine. We're going to do a whole different episode.
Yes. Wine and food, I'm
well.
happy to talk about anytime. This has been so fun. I'm so grateful to be on here and to have this like very, very thoughtful conversation with the two of you. So thank you.
Same here. Listen, we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks.
Rock on. Take care.
Hey, rock stars. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Yeah, and listen, we know how busy you are, and grabbing those little nuggets of wisdom that can amp up your life are super hard to come by. So we hope this episode helped you enough for you to maybe subscribe and consider leaving us a rating and a review so that we can continue to grow the show.
Thus That Rock is a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network and also supports Cannonball Kids Cancer and their fight for finding and funding treatment options for kids who have run out of options. They're amazing. Their work is incredible. To learn more, please go to cannonballkidscancer.org.
Finally, if you're interested in having Brant or Jim or both of us speak at your event, whether as a virtual webinar or an in-person conference keynote or mastermind, contact us directly at thoughtsatrock.com.
Until next time,
Rock on!